Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a topic that, honestly, we all probably take for granted. I mean, when you look up and see a flag flapping in the breeze on a government building, or waving in the stands at the Olympics, it's super easy to just think, oh, it's just a colorful piece of cloth. But the reality? It is absolutely fascinating. Flags are not just decorative designs, they're actually living, breathing legal documents. They are literally packed with complex math, super strict protocol hierarchies, and simmering geopolitical tensions.
Okay, let's dive into this, because just imagine a piece of fabric so incredibly powerful that a tiny millimeter mistake in hanging it forced the US government, under Barack Obama back in 2010, to issue a formal public apology to an entire foreign delegation. No way, right? And in modern sports, stadium security guards literally have strict orders to confiscate certain flags from everyday fans in the stands just to avoid major diplomatic meltdowns. So today, we're going to unpack exactly how and why these quote-unquote simple cloths hold so much unbelievable power.
Let's start with Section 1, Shapes and Logistical Nightmares. We're going to look at the physical challenges of sewing, storing, and folding unique national flags. It's wild to see how the rich history of these symbols completely clashes with modern logistics and fast-paced assembly lines.
To really picture this, I want you to ask yourself, how on earth do you sew a math equation? Because, the vast majority of textile factories out there are built to just cut fabric from massive continuous rolls and quickly hem up some squares or rectangles. But there's one country that totally throws standard geometry out the window. Enter Nepal. The wild thing about their constitutional recipe is that it doesn't just give you simple dimensions in inches or centimeters for its double triangle flag. Nope. Instead, their constitution actually includes an appendix with a 24-step, highly detailed geometric manual. To draw it right, you absolutely have to use a ruler and a compass, following instructions like trace line AB, then draw perpendicular line AC. It's this beautiful, ancient design that just happens to be the ultimate nightmare for commercial automated sewing machines. They literally can't make those sharp internal turns in the triangles without bunching up the fabric.
And to make things even more of a headache for manufacturers, the mathematical proportion of Nepal's flag is an irrational number, 1.2190133 and so on, derived from a fourth-degree polynomial equation. It basically crashes standard cutting software. So what's the result? Honestly, some massive international logistical laziness. For years, even at the 2016 Rio Olympics, organizing committees just threw their hands up and printed the two triangles onto a standard rectangular white patch so that all the flags on the poles would be the exact same size. It was a total relief for the protocol folks, but kind of a slap in the face to the original design.
Let's look at another shapeshifter. Switzerland, along with Vatican City, strictly rocks a square flag. It's a 1-to-1 proportion. But despite that very firm rule, you'll often see a rectangular 2x3 version out in the wild. Why? Well, back in 1941, the Swiss legally had to adopt this rectangular shape for their merchant ships just to avoid confusion from a distance out on the open ocean. And today, massive organizations like the International Olympic Committee or FIFA literally force Switzerland to use the rectangular version just to maintain a uniform, visual harmony on the flagpoles next to all the other countries.
Now, if we're talking about manufacturing headaches and costs, nobody beats Paraguay. Thanks to a decree from way back in 1842, Paraguay is the only UN-recognized country that has a completely different design on the front and the back of its flag. The front celebrates independence with a star, while the back shows a lion at a Phrygian cap defending liberty. And you can't just print this on translucent fabric, right? Because then the coats of arms would bleed through or look backwards. Factories actually have to print two entirely separate pieces of cloth and stitch them back to back with total millimeter precision. It's an absolute heraldic beauty, but man, it is incredibly expensive to produce without transparency errors.
Okay, moving right along to Section 2, Strict Rules of the Mast. We're looking at how invisible rules and regulations dictate what we can fly. We're shifting from the physical construction of the cloth to the strict domestic laws and hierarchies that govern a flag's daily life.
Check out this contrast. Today, in Germany, there is a very strict separation. If an everyday citizen or a private company decides to fly the state flag, the one with the official Bundesschild eagle on it, they can literally get slapped with a fine. Citizens are supposed to stick to the simple tricolor. Now, Argentina actually used to have this exact same concept. Before 1985, Argentine civilians were legally banned from flying the version of the flag that had the famous Son of May on it. That was the official flag of the nation, strictly reserved for the state and the military. It wasn't until a 1985 legal reform that the right to fly the Son of May was opened up to all citizens, unifying the design for everyone.
And then you have Uruguay,
taking institutional protocol to a whole new level. Thanks to a 1952 decree, Uruguay is completely unique globally because it has 3 official national flags simultaneously. On national holidays, public buildings are legally required to fly all 3 together on 3 perfectly aligned masts. But what happens on a random Tuesday? Logistical rules dictate that only the main Pabellon Nacional goes up in the center. The other 2 masts are left totally bare, the ropes just tied off at the base, acting as a visual cue to everyone that it's just a normal, ordinary day.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the physical orientation of a flag can be absolutely crucial. Philippine law explicitly states from its 1898 design that their flag changes its entire meaning just by flipping it upside down. If the red stripe is on top, the country is formally declaring a state of war, prioritizing blood and courage over peace. Remember that anecdote I teased at the beginning? During a 2010 summit in New York, U.S. protocol staff accidentally hung the Philippine flag upside down right behind President Obama. They basically photographed the country in absolute war mode, which immediately triggered a very real, very embarrassing formal diplomatic apology from the White House. Whoops.
All right, stepping beyond civil laws, we enter Section 3, the sacred and divine. Why some nations treat their flag as an untouchable entity. We are raising the stakes here, exploring what happens when a flag is tied not just to the government, but to deep religious and spiritual constraints. Let's look at how religion shapes the rules of flying a flag at half-mast, which is the universal sign of mourning. In Saudi Arabia and Somaliland, their flags feature the Shahada, the sacred Islamic declaration of faith. Lowering those words is considered pure blasphemy, so under no circumstances, even the death of a king, are they ever lowered. Iran applies a very similar rule because its central emblem represents the word Allah, so they just fly a separate black flag on a secondary mast when they're in mourning. But contrast that with the West. In Spain, the Ministry of Defense actually mandates that military flags must be lowered to half-mast every single year during Easter week. In this case, the official state mourning isn't for a politician, but for the death of Jesus Christ. Moving to our final and honestly most tense section. Section 4. Geopolitics in the stadium. We're diving into diplomatic flag disputes during international sporting events to see what goes down when these powerful symbols collide in the highly regulated world of global tournaments. I want you to imagine having to send your absolute best athletes to compete on the world stage, but legally, your territory has 0 official flag of its own. That is exactly the bizarre situation facing Northern Ireland.
So here's the deal with Northern Ireland. They used to have an official flag called the Ulster Banner, but it completely lost its legal status back in 1973 when their parliament was dissolved during the conflict known as the Troubles. So legally, under British law, only the Union Jack represents the territory. But in the sports world, organizations like FIFA and the Commonwealth Games desperately needed a distinct visual symbol for Northern Irish athletes. So, purely out of logistical need and tradition, they keep the Ulster Banner alive. This happens even though it's intensely controversial at the local level. Unionists fervently defend it, nationalists completely reject it, and police heavily regulate its use to prevent riots. It is a visual identity kept on life support strictly by sports.
And that weird need for sports to just solve diplomatic tensions brings us to the most famous case of flag censorship in the world. This stems from the spirit of the 1979 Nagoya Resolution, which was driven entirely by the intense political pressure exerted by the People's Republic of China over the sovereignty of Taiwan. So the crucial point is this. For Taiwan to even be allowed to participate in the Olympics or FIFA, they have to accept a completely manufactured identity. They are forced to compete as Chinese Taipei. They can't use their actual red and blue national flag. Instead, it's replaced by a white flag featuring the plum blossom that camouflages their national sun emblem. Even if they win gold, a heavily modified anthem plays that strips out any mention of sovereignty. And the enforcement is intense. Stadium security strictly enforces these rules on everyday fans in the crowd, actively confiscating official Taiwan flags to avoid any official complaints from Beijing. Which brings us full circle. We started out looking at how folks use geometry equations just to cut fabric in Nepal. We talked about domestic fines in Germany, sacred religious rules of mourning, all the way to fans getting their flags literally confiscated in international stadiums. All of this leaves us with one pretty profound thought. The next time you see a flag waving in the wind, remember that you are looking at a complex legal document, a religious pact, and a geopolitical weapon all stitched together in one place. So I have to ask you, if a piece of fabric can start a war, halt the Olympics, or honor the divine, is it ever really just a piece of cloth? Thanks for joining us for this explainer. See you next time.